And Vickie, I love like your setup behind you with the mirror and the floral. Like
Thanks.
I'm actually working with a designer right now to like redo my setup behind me. So every time a guest has a good one, I'm like, oh, that's so pretty.
Like, I'm going to
Thank
remember
you.
it.
I have to remember that. Where are you from again? Where are you joining us from?
So I'm on the East Coast and I don't share location. I have a protective
Okay.
order against my ex. So
Okay. That's let's get into that a little bit, the story behind that, because the work you do now, you are educating women about emotional abuse and how to protect kids from emotional abuse. And you have quite a story behind that. Can you share your personal story about how you got into this work?
sure. So as is very common, once I realized that I was in an emotionally abusive relationship, in addition to other abuses that were going on,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't leave right away. In fact, then I got pregnant. And so after having my daughter, she really was the catalyst that woke me up. And probably before I was even feeling worthy of myself to have a healthy life, I knew she was worthy. And I wanted her to grow up being the person God created her to be. And I knew I had to leave. So there was a moment where she was 1 year old. She was in her high chair and the ex had berated me verbally about something. Who knows what it was? Probably something dumb. And he left to go to work and I started crying and I was slumped in the corner and I see my little girl lean over her high chair and look at me and just watch me. And I thought, I'm done. There's no way I'm going to continue this and have her grow up like that. But as many people know, once you leave any kind of abusive relationship with children, you have to share the children.
Mm-hmm.
And so then my
Mm-hmm.
story took a huge turn into now we're going to navigate co-parenting. And co-parenting in and of itself is like a perfect world. People just didn't get along and now they have their kids' best interest at heart. And so let's make, some cool. But that's not the case when you're working with someone who's a narcissist and, an abuser, fill in the blank, whatever word you want to use there. And so the next 4 years sharing custody with her dad was a nightmare. And my daughter suffered greatly, not from physical abuse, but from all the emotional and psychological and even spiritual abuse, where she became a people pleaser. She was chasing after bullies on the playground. She couldn't do things good enough. And so she had this perfectionism growing in her. Playing Legos with her was a nightmare because if one little Lego fell apart, like she fell apart. And so I say all that because when she was suffering, I realized I had to rip the muzzle off my mouth and figure out how to help her. And do it in a way that wasn't going to be so disparaging her dad, because at
Yeah.
that age, and most kids will go talk to their parent and tell them everything.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of what started the whole thing. I mean, I could talk for like 3 hours about my story, but like that's what started the coaching business, came from my victories when I was co-parenting. And when I saw changes in my daughter, then, how things progressed from there. And now we just live an incredibly beautiful life despite the abuse.
Now, when I've seen friends go through these situations before, emotional abuse is a very hard thing to pinpoint because a lot of people like will almost talk themselves out of being emotionally abused. Like they'll bring it on themselves and say, "No, this is all my fault. I should have done it better. I should have done it this way." Even the ex will say like, this is all your fault. Like, I can't
Right.
believe like you're doing this. So like, what are some signs that women should look out for that there is emotional abuse happening?
I think you hit it number one, which is you're always feeling like you're wrong, always feeling like it's on you to make things better.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
That's probably one of the number one things that you can know something's imbalanced in the relationship. And especially if your partner is telling you it's your fault, you're to blame,
Mhm.
you got to do it better. And Bree, would you agree with that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, like we're sitting here like I'm trying so hard because one of the things that you said a minute ago that really still resonates so strongly with me when I went through my divorce was how strong. So in Arizona, you have to go through a parenting course. I imagine like most states are like that. There's some kind of a parenting course you have to go through when there are children involved in the divorce. And what I remember being hammered so hard was parent alienation. You can't say anything negative about the other parent because that could be grounds for parent alienation. Like you're turning the children against the other parent. And in my case, like I didn't even know the terms emotional abuse or financial abuse. And those were things that was brought up to me by my lawyer when I was going through things. And I'm like, then I start reading about it and I'm like, oh my God, that is 100% where I was. Everything was always my fault. I always had to be the one to bend, apologize, 100% like environmentally engineering things so that he wouldn't blow up. He wouldn't get upset. He wouldn't lash out. The kids wouldn't suffer and have to have him be angry. But you don't recognize it when you're in it. You just don't. Sorry.
You basically have no, not sorry. I'm adding on and asking some more questions of this situation. Just trying to define it for any listeners out there who are like, but you don't understand, like it is my fault. But
yeah,
what it sounds like the missing part of that relationship is you don't have a partner who accepts accountability for their own actions. They put everything on you. Would that be right?
I mean, I'd say yes, but also you have the flavor of a narcissist or an abuser who will apologize all the time and say it's never going to happen again, and then it does.
Right. There's that cycle, like they call it the honeymoon phase, right? Yeah. Where when you finally get to the point where you bring up that these things don't feel right, they may apologize or they might just say like, okay, I won't do that anymore. I'll do better. And
they'll appease you and for a while. Make you think it's all good. And then it goes bad again.
Yeah. Yeah. Any kind of like, I call it it's like a squeeze and release of your muscle. So the toxic cycle is you have that squeeze of the pain. Something is going wrong or bad, or you're feeling bad. There was a blow up or he did something harmful. And then there's the release where either you just go to your corners and you kind of gather yourself back up. And then perhaps there's that release where they come back and it's all romance and flowers and everything's great until the next incident.
Now I have a question about that. So, and I'm wondering, Joanna, if you're thinking the same thing, like how every relationship has its ups and downs. Every relationship has goods and bads. How do you determine when this whole squeeze and release type situation you're talking about is happening and it's not just your average conflict?
Well, that's a good question because I actually thought about this the other day, that one of the things that we don't show our kids when we're in this type of relationship is healthy conflict resolution.
Yes.
So, right. So I think you would know that something is off. First of all, if you have any ability to feel it in your gut, something's not right. He's pushing a boundary that maybe you don't even know it's a boundary, but like there's some kind of line and it's being pushed repeatedly and you're uncomfortable. But really, I think it's the fact that it happens again and again and again. Nothing's getting better no matter what you do. That would be my answer.
Can you give me an example of like a boundary that may be pushed? Like something you've seen in like your clients or heard or.
Certainly. So it could be, gosh, I mean, I have so many examples. I'll use one during co-parenting.
Give them to us because we all know that there are people listening to this podcast episode going like, yeah, is this what's happening?
I know. So gosh, it's so huge to answer this question. I'm going to give you one from when I was dating him and then one from when I was co-parenting. How about that? Okay. Dating, I would tell him like, this person's important to me, a friend. Okay. And then he would come alongside and pretend that person was important to me and to him. And then I would say, okay, I'm going out with this person for dinner. And all of a sudden there was a problem. So it wasn't a boundary per se, but it was like, here's something that's important to me. He knows it. He knows it's an important relationship. And now he's coming in to sabotage. So now he's like, well, where are you going? When are you coming home? And it would be so now it's a problem for me to have a relationship with this person. So already it's not necessarily a boundary, but a problem. Okay. With something that's
controlling your relationships with other people.
Yes.
Okay. One of the big things.
I have to relate to this. Like I just now that I'm out of it, I can be like, one thing I used to do, my family lives in town and I would talk to my sister on the phone and she would often call me on her drive home from work or at the end of the night. And my ex would say like, I don't appreciate it when your sister calls like in the evening. This should be our time together. You really need to like limit that. That's being disrespectful to our relationship. And I would go, "Oh my God, is it? It must be." Like I had no idea. Like he's right. Oh, that is disrespectful to our time together. Me speaking
Yes.
to my sister. And that like that's red flag. Not
Yep.
normal,
Red
right?
flag,
But they
red flag.
convince you that they are right and that you're doing something wrong or disrespectful to them. So you're trying to appease.
That's
Yeah.
a hard thing. And I want to hear about how you saw it in parenting, Vickie, right after this. So we're talking about signs to know if you are in a relationship with emotional abuse. And Vickie, you're about to share something that happened to you like after you married your ex and in a parenting situation.
Yeah. So this really was when we were separated.
Mhm.
And I had a boundary because most of us that are in a relationship with someone who is an abuser in some way or controlling, we have very weak boundaries or we don't know how to have boundaries.
Right, because you've been told that they're bad boundaries, that they're bad to have.
100%. Yes. They hurt him or they're disrespectful or something. Yes.
Mhm.
And so you're right. Exactly right. So when I was co-parenting with him, so I was separate, thinking like I had escaped with my daughter and like things were better and I was free, but really I was not free. The example is I'm bringing my daughter to him for a custody exchange for his time. And I had told him like, we're done, like we're done. And yet he continued to embrace me at exchanges, give me a hug, and my arms were by my side, and he's still putting his arms around me.
Mm.
Yeah. That sounds like, well, it should be easy just to tell him no. Well, not really. Not when you have this history of abuse and you don't want to have conflict in front of your child.
Exactly. And
Mhm.
also like you're trying to teach your child like about love and like you're handing them over to somebody. You don't want them to be afraid of him, that person you're handing them
Exactly.
to. Yeah. Puts you in
It is
a position.
Yes.
it is such a tricky scenario too, because at the same time you realize that the time your child spends with this person is not beneficial to your
Right.
child. And having to navigate that is just, it feels impossible to me. So like going in now to like having the kids involved and kids spending time and kids getting on the other side of emotional abuse. What are some things that people see in their kids to like give them a, red flag, this situation isn't going well for them?
Yeah. I think one of the number one things or signs that they're being emotionally abused is they over apologize.
Mm.
So they apologize for breathing. They apologize for tripping, like things that are not reasons to apologize.
Mm.
That's a
Yeah.
huge red flag that they're being emotionally abused. So saying I'm sorry all the time, seeking to get your approval. Now that's tricky because most kids want their parents' approval, right?
Yeah.
But it could be, you will notice, I guess the best thing I can say around this is as a mom, you have a gut, you have instincts, and you will know like, oh, she's doing this and it's so fun and she's trying to get me to like it and blah, blah, blah. But then it's like over the top. And you get that feeling in your stomach, like something's off, something's not right. Now, especially if you know he emotionally abused you, that he controlled you, that he disparaged you, that he, tried to basically dismantle your strength. And so you can kind of know that he probably is trying to do that to your child or children too.
Mm-hmm.
That's so interesting. So over apologizing just for things that they shouldn't even apologize for, and like trying eagerly to please and get approval. And I know this is so different, but I'm also talking to all the people pleasers out there. Like, how is the behavior you're seeing in your kids different from that of like a, general people pleasing behavior?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I think whenever kids are really trying to people please, there is some unmet emotional need. So you could be a great mom, but maybe there's something that your kids is not getting, whether it's from you or from the other parent, something. And so I would just say, like, ask them some questions, start having
Curious.
conversations with them and hearing from them rather than you just deciding, let me just, tell them this, teach them that. Ask questions. The same goes for when you're dealing with kids that are being abused in any way, emotionally or otherwise. is asking lots of questions, because one of the things that they don't have is autonomy, and they don't have what's called
Mm-hmm.
agency, which is control over their life. And most kids don't in general, but they have
Mm-hmm.
less than any normal, quote unquote, normal kid does.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
what I hear you saying is like the symptoms are pretty much the same as general people pleasing, but the triggers for those symptoms are different, which is why you really have to get from your kids exactly what's going on.
Yes.
You
Because
know,
I could tell you,
go
oh,
ahead.
because like as a child who was a people pleaser, I was a people pleaser, and I also see my son have these people pleasing behaviors, and like the things you were describing is like my son to a T, over apologizing, seeking for my approval. And I have had conversations with him. Anxiety runs in the family. And his is a result of him just saying like he's not doing things well enough. And he's like beating himself up. And it's nothing anybody says to him. He says it comes like from within. And so I think it's an important distinguishing thing to make, because I know a lot of
Yeah.
our listeners out there struggle with the anxiety as well. So if you're listening to this right now, like you have kids with anxiety, there is this very, very different thing from it's the cause of it, not so much the symptoms itself.
Yeah. And you know what
Yeah.
else? There was a couple of other things that I feel like I would observe in my kids. And by all means, Vickie, like pop in here on what your thoughts are. Like I would notice that my kids, when they came home, they were just much more quiet, reserved. They would watch to see what was going on before they would interact. They often didn't want to leave the home when they came back from their dads. They just wanted to come home and just stay home and not really go anywhere, not really do anything. And these were kids that used to be pretty social, outgoing, active kids. And another thing too I would see is that they just, their emotional stability, their resilience wasn't as strong as it was before. It was almost like, you know, when you've had a really bad day, you know, you've just had a really bad day. Things have been like going wrong all day long. By the end of the day, you're just emotionally exhausted. And that trigger for a meltdown is much easier to get to. I feel like I would see that a lot as well. Like these emotional outbursts that, and kids have emotional outbursts. We all know that. Like so do adults. We all have that. But it just seemed like it came much easier, came much more often when they were first adjusting for like those first 48 to 72 hours of coming back, because we did week on and week off in our household, and I think it was
100%. Because to your point, when kids are being emotionally abused and they're at their other parent's house, they have to keep it together.
Yeah.
And so when they come home to you and you're the safe place, not just physically, but emotionally safe, that's when the meltdown happens. So yes, that's absolutely a good sign not a good sign, but a sign that something's going on, because their nervous system has been in fight or flight the whole time they were with the emotional abusive parent. And so they come home and they have to let it out somehow. And so
Right.
often it is meltdowns, right? And what you just described also is like they're like zoned out. The way that a lot of us describe it is it takes us a couple of days to quote, get our kids back, where they're back to their normal personalities. So yes, that's another good sign. Another
Right.
sign.
And I feel like as parents, or especially as moms, do we not all collectively ask ourselves when our kids have meltdowns with us and not with other people, what am I doing wrong?
Mm-hmm.
It
Always.
must be right. We always say, and there are times when it is that we're not holding firm boundaries and stuff like that. That is certainly a possibility. But I think when it happens a lot, and then you have other people asking you that, or especially the other parent, and I think this is true, like in a relationship where you're still married, you're still actively with that partner, as well as the ones where you're divorced and you're not actively with them, where they're like, well, it must be you because they don't do this with me. And like,
that would
how
be even like perpetuating it, right? Like,
yes. So Vickie,
yeah.
I am curious. What do you recommend people do when they are faced with that comment from their parenting, right? From the co-parent?
And I want to hear about it, Vickie, right after this. So Vickie, you were just about to tell us, what do you do when your kids are having meltdowns at your house and then your ex is asking you, well, what did you do wrong? Like, it must be you. Like, what's going on?
Right. Well, the name of your podcast is so perfect for this question, because
Yeah.
The guilt that we all as moms feel, we all know that guilt for whatever the issue is, situation.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're adding on guilt that you don't have to live with this emotional abuse any longer, but your kids have to, and you're not there to buffer or shield them. So the
Right.
guilt's going to go from like level 10 guilt to level 1,000 because of that.
Somehow
So,
it's still your fault, even though you're not with the person anymore.
right. And everything's great at his house. And what's wrong with you? Because they're having problems with you, but when they go to him, they're angels. Like that's the message you're going to get, right?
This is
So,
something I've heard from so many friends who have this going on. Like, it's like you're in the home. Like yes.
and there's nothing that you can say to a person who is being abusive that's going to make any sense, make any difference, or placate them. So really, you kind of have to bypass and not necessarily answer that question directly.
Okay.
But what I think the best advice is to, first of all, you have to check yourself because the guilt you feel could overtake you. And then if someone else is coming in saying it's your fault, et cetera, it could be overwhelming.
Yeah.
And so always start off by advising, that a mom really works on renewing her mind in the fact that she's giving her kids a safe home, emotionally safe home for whatever time they're with her. Like she's got to start there. And then from there, you can start to, okay, what things can we do to mitigate the meltdowns? What things can we do to help and teach them coping mechanisms, right?
Mm-hmm.
I answered your question, but I went around it because really there's no direct answer. It's, you got to start with alleviating that extra guilt you feel and focusing on knowing you're giving them an emotionally safe home. That's the place to start.
Basically, you have to start with you to make sure that you are the strong, like, harbor that they could come into after they're in this taxing situation. And you touched a little bit on teaching kids like resiliency and these emotional coping skills. What are other ways like moms can empower their kids to really survive against this emotional abuse?
So much of what I teach in my courses and coaching has to do with this particular question. And what I realized is, I didn't go from like being a doormat and a people pleaser and in an emotionally abusive relationship to all of a sudden being like standing up to him. It didn't.
Right.
Like I had to incrementally get there. And so do our kids.
Okay.
So the answer isn't teach your kids to stand up to their dad and use their voice. That might be the ultimate goal. That's not the initial goal.
Yeah.
So, right, Bree, do you agree?
Oh yeah, I'm laughing because like in my scenario, like I've been divorced for 7 years now, and 7 years of therapy for my kids over the course, in and out, right? 5 different therapists, and every single one has had the same goal. Teach the kids to talk to their dad. Teach the kids to be able to talk to their dad. And it's exhausting seeing that and never really making progress. Like one of them is starting to make progress with a new therapist that they're with, and it's fantastic. I love it. I'm so proud. My heart is bursting. But it's also like, I just want to be like, damn it, guys, this has been 7 years. What do we have to do to make that progress? And it feels like to other people, like they'll ask the same question, right? Why can't they? I don't understand why they can't. It must be a problem with, then all of a sudden it starts to turn into like, it must be a problem with them. And it's not.
So what's the first goal then, if it's not to talk to the parent?
So to me, the first goal that I started with my daughter and I teach other moms to do is boost their self-esteem, their confidence outside of dad.
Like that.
So for example, one of the things that emotional abuse teaches you, unfortunately, is that your voice doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So that goal of standing up to the dad, if the dad's the abuser, right? Standing up to him is like the ultimate. It's not the start, because if you stood up to him, you're going to get, a barrage of verbal diarrhea. And so are the kids. So they're going to be like, well, why bother?
Right.
So for me, I started to teach my daughter that her voice mattered. That meant things in our house. So giving her options. What are we having for dinner? Which sounds so like not important, but it is, because then I'd listen to her opinion and then we would do it. And this is like, like you build So her opinion started to matter in our home. Okay,
Okay.
now her voice is mattering. Then I started to go to like Starbucks and have her go to the barista and ask for a napkin, ask for a straw, where she would not. She would have clung to my side because she was so anxious.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I just started to, because I knew that the barista is going to be like, oh, she's so cute. Here's your straw. So it's silly, but then her brain's making the connection. My voice matters. Here's the result. It's positive.
Yeah.
Yes. That's excellent. Because at first I was like, when you build kids' self-esteem that they matter outside their parents, you think your first thought goes to like, okay, hobbies. What skills do they have? Like, what are they into right now? And how could they build that? But you don't hear about the insidious nature of things where if they're in a skill that then dad starts to tear down and tell them that they're not good at the skill. And here's a kid wanting to please their father, that they automatically get out of those things that gives them value and gives them strength. And it's so difficult. So I love those easy examples of just having them go to like a barista and make them little moments that you can control outside of their time with dad. What else?
Boost their self. Yeah, I was gonna say, so boost their self-confidence. What's another thing that parents can do to help empower their kids?
So I also started working with my daughter to identify, I'll say bullies, but really it was emotional abuse in the movies we were watching, in the TV shows we were watching.
Really?
Books that we were reading. And honestly, this just came out of necessity. You know what I mean? Like you're a mom and you're doing all the things and you're at your wit's end. And I always say it kind of was like just came out of the sky, like you just try things and it worked. So we were watching, Disney movie. We're watching, let's use Rapunzel. It's just like the ultimate example, but emotionally abusive parent. Yeah. An emotionally abusive mom. And to the extreme, but we would watch the movie and then I'd ask her questions as we were playing afterwards. So not grill her, but playing, what do you think about Rapunzel? What do you think she felt? And what do you think about the mom? And we would just have conversations. And it helped her get in touch with what did she think? Not what was mom telling her, right?
Mm-hmm.
What did she think? And then I would affirm what she thought and felt. And then that just started to build her. It's like her meter.
I love it.
Yeah.
Which needs built in everybody. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. The ability to see that there's BS, there's red flags, but we're not using those terms. And it just grew from there. I mean, it just kept going to where, a couple of years later, we moved to a neighborhood and this girl was befriending her. And after the first day or two, she came to me and she goes, I don't like what she's saying. It's a red flag. Now, at that point, we had talked about red flags, but I mean,
her meter, my heart. I'm so proud of this.
Right.
The language is amazing.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, these are skills for life. So you go into the workplace, you're going to need these skills. So these are skills for life. And so the whole point is you teach them outside of their dad first, get them solid. And they are so smart. They will start to realize and come to you and say, oh, I think dad lied to me the other day. Or do you think dad's lying? Or, they're going to come to you with these revelations because you've built them up in other places.
Mm-hmm. So they're starting to realize themselves exactly what's going on and how that situation is playing out in terms of what they're doing. That's interesting.
They may not know the full thing, but they start to get clues. Yes.
Yeah, they start to get clues. What would you say if to people listening out there and they're not in an emotional abuse situation, but they're pretty sure that their friend may be in an emotional abusive relationship? How can friends help other women to support them in this situation?
Well, what I'll say is one of the biggest things for me that woke me up every time this happened was a friend who I used to lament to and tell her the problems and over and over. She just looked at me one time and said, I really can't help you anymore. There's nothing I haven't said already.
Mm-hmm.
And even though that sounds like she wasn't being supportive, it actually was a big, huge aha for me. Because that meant this shouldn't keep going. There should be a resolution. There should be a fix. And everything I've done to this point hasn't fixed it. So I might need to look somewhere else. That'd be one thing.
Yeah,
what would you say?
She didn't come right out and say, I think that you're in an abusive relationship.
Right.
Because
Mhm.
you probably would have been like, no, he doesn't.
Right.
I'm not getting hit. No, I'm
Right.
fine. Like, know what that is. It's sometimes like it's a bit of an embarrassment, I think. Like I know that in my case I had several friends that would tell me, "Bree, your relationship is not healthy.
Hmm.
Somebody should not do that. They should not treat you like that." Like sometimes there would be phone calls that would come in and I'm out on a play date with a friend of mine, and the phone call would come in, and my ex-husband would be like, "I'm home. Where are you and the kids?" And I'm like, "Oh, well, we're at the park. We're at a park with Jen right now." And he'd be like, "Well, you need to come home because we should be having dinner in like half an hour." And I'd be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I would hang up the phone. I'm like, "We got to go."
Yeah.
Why? "Oh, because my husband came home early. I didn't know he was going to, and now I have to go make dinner because it's going to be late if it's not there." She's like, "That's not normal." And you would think that, like, in that case, like, that's where you kind of get embarrassed. You kind of withdraw because you're like, well, I know that they don't think it's normal, but this is my normal.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And there's a point where finally, when everybody keeps telling you normal isn't normal, that you're like, oh, crap. I think I got lost in that logic already now. I'm all like, oh, where did I go?
But it's like normal isn't normal because I mean, you go into relationships with this idea of what love is and how like it should be romantic and wonderful, and
Oh,
those things exist, and
you've
they
heard me
exist.
say this. These ruined us. And so did John
where
Hughes.
That's where I'm pulling this information from. I'll cite my source, Bree Tucker.
John Hughes kept teaching us that we could change the bad boy. It don't happen.
Yeah, you don't change them. Oh my gosh, I had so many like thoughts about like changing guys and be like, oh, bad guy. Oh, but like if he really loves you, he can change. And that's the message that you got from 90s movies or 80s movies, most of all.
Either way.
Yeah, it's a hard line in emotional abuse because even the things we saw in popular media, it was mostly emotional abuse that we were meant to normalize into our relationships. So there's no wonder that women are stuck in these things.
Oh my gosh.
For sure. So what is something that you're looking forward to, Vickie? What's something exciting going on in your life?
So, I mean, personally, I literally wake up every day. Thank God that I'm free still every day. Don't have to walk on eggshells anymore. And I hope I never lose that gratitude. But professionally, we have begun a membership for women who are co-parenting with someone who's abusive. And so I'm excited about that. It is a community of other women that support each other. And I'm able to coach in there a couple times a month. People can ask their questions. And it's just a really great place because for women to receive support, because this can feel very lonely and like you're on an island and you're out on a play date with other moms. Bree, tell me if you relate. And you're going through hell trying to help your kids, build them up in this abuse. And the mom's talking about redoing your kitchen and you want to throat punch her because meanwhile, your kid is like having major 10 meltdowns every time they come home.
Yeah.
So this community I'm excited about because it gives moms a place who are dealing with this to go with other moms who understand.
Excellent.
Right. And I think
much needed.
that's a huge thing, right? Like it's finding your community. It's finding your community, finding a place where like people can understand and can relate. And that can be hard.
Well, thank you so much, Vickie. You've given us such insight into emotional abuse and especially how we can protect our kids from it. And we thank you so much.